In 1987, I was a young soldier in the Army, feeling so grown up with my new life and a regular paycheck. Shortly after being stationed at a base in Virginia, I went and bought a new car. It was a bright red Yugo. In case you're unfamiliar with the Yugo, it was the epitome of a first-time buyer's car. The result of pairing a Yugoslavian automaker with Fiat engines, Yugos were small, incredibly cheap, and the definition of flimsy. My dad called it a Coke can on wheels. I routinely snapped off the window crank handles, partly because they turned counterclockwise to standard American vehicles, but mostly just because they were cheap. When I first moved to Texas, there was an auto dealer who advertised, buy one of our not cheap cars, and we'll throw in a Yugo for free. It was actually a radio ad. Buy our car, we'll give you a Yugo for free. No way. It's true. It's true. It wasn't my first car, but it was the first new car I had ever bought. It got the job done, but obviously durability and safety were not high on my shopping list when I bought the Yugo. By 1990, I was a new mom. If you've ever tried to put a baby in a rear-facing car seat in the back of a two-door compact car, you understand the beginnings of my problems. Not only was navigating the ins and outs difficult, there was barely room enough for me, baby, car seat, stroller, and diaper bag. Groceries usually came home stacked up on the front seat and on the floorboard. I was living in Texas with baby and Yugo when my mom sent me a newspaper clipping. You know, back when people wrote letters and sent each other things in the mail. It was an article about a Yugo that had flipped off the Mackinac Bridge. For context, the Mackinac Bridge has an open steel grating for most of the bridge span, and it's the only connection point between the upper and lower peninsulas of Michigan, crossing the Straits of Mackinac. It's not uncommon for the bridge to be closed during high winds that whip up between the two land masses. The black and white picture with the article was taken from the shore and showed a barge with a crane on it, pulling what appeared to just be a mass of crumpled metal out of the lake. It looked like somebody had just wadded up the car like you'd wad up a piece of paper. This poor Yugo had been on the bridge when the wind came up. While no other vehicles were affected, and it wasn't actually windy enough to close the bridge, it flipped the car off the bridge like you and I flip over a red Solo cup. The lone occupant did not survive the impact, falling 200 feet before meeting the water. I don't think my mom's intent was to scare the dickens out of me. I mean, I was in Texas. I wasn't anywhere near the Mackinac Bridge. I'm giving her the benefit of the doubt. As a new mom, though, all I could think about was how tiny and fragile that car was and how tiny and fragile my daily traveling partner was. So with baby on my hip, I walked in the San Antonio Jeep dealership, intent on buying myself a new Cherokee. With 4 doors, a big cargo bay, and excellent crash ratings, this was the vehicle for me. But wouldn't you know, the first salesman I met, after telling him what I was there for and what I was currently driving, literally looked me up and down and the baby on my hip and said, "I don't think you can afford what we're selling here." I was mortified. Embarrassed beyond belief. I was not as savvy to the world or as sassy as I am now, because that only comes from having experiences like the one I was going through. I turned around and walked straight out of that dealership, getting baby back into that car seat and myself out of there as quick as I could. Somewhere in the days after my encounter with the colossally rude Jeep salesman, I resolved that someday, some way, I would get my Cherokee. I ended up driving that Yugo until 1992, when I bought another new car when we moved to Ohio. We actually put the Yugo in the back of the U-Haul and hauled my husband's Audi on a car trailer. And when we got to Ohio, we found a railroad head where we could back the U-Haul up to and back the car back off of it. I bought a Chevy Cavalier, a 5-speed manual transmission, no AC, a radio, but no CD player. Still a 2-door, But by then, the baby was big enough to get himself in and out of the back seat. I remember seeing it in the lot for the first time with the price of $88.88 painted on the windshield. But a Jeep still wasn't in the budget. Fast forward to 1997. I was in college working on my bachelor's degree in construction. I landed a part-time job with a local asphalt company. A small family-owned business, Mr. Ellis, had a stellar reputation in the community. I was grateful to get that job. He owned all his own asphalt equipment and had several of his own crews working for him. But if a project needed concrete culverts or drop inlets or any of that kind of civil work done, he had a contractor named Roger. I met Roger the first time when he was putting in pipe and structures on a huge corner lot where there would eventually be a parking lot that Mr. Ellis would pave. Roger had been in the business a very long time and mostly spent his job on the job sites rechecking survey points and telling his crews what to do. His vehicle was a white, four-door, four-wheel drive Jeep Cherokee. And he drove that thing everywhere. It had so much room in the back, he said, he could put all his survey equipment in the cargo bay and still be able to carry passengers in the back seat. It's indestructible, he said. And this was coming from a man who drove where they were still building roads. Roger in his white Cherokee reminded me of the promise I had made to the younger version of myself. So upon graduation from college, I again walked into a Jeep dealership, this time in Savannah, Georgia. Armed with a letter from my new employer detailing my generous salary, it was a much different experience. I test drove one of the many Cherokees they had. I really want the bright red, not the darker chili pepper red, I told the salesman, half expecting him to say, "This is what there is, take it or leave it." His obsequiousness almost knocked me over. No problem, ma'am. We can get that red color for you the day after tomorrow. On a Saturday morning in June of 1999, I drove my new Cherokee home. Big Red and I have spent 26 years together. She got a trailer hitch and moved us from Georgia to Florida, one trailer load at a time. We were rear-ended on I-95 and rolled onto the driver's side when she was so new she still had a paper tag. Insurance fixed her, and we kept going. We drove to Texas to visit a college friend of mine. She took us to the Tennessee mountains multiple times. Pigeon Forge happens to be exactly halfway between my house and my parents'. So we met there 10 years ago, my dad bringing the cradle he had hand built for his first great-grandson, my grandson. Big Red was sitting in the parking lot next to the barracks at Fort Stewart when I returned home from my Iraq deployment. I saw her as my bus passed the parking lot on the way from the airport to the parade field. The parade field is where I would see my family for the first time in 8 months, but I saw Big Red first. And while I am less emotional now, the first time I wrote that, I had to stop to cry. You should have seen me when the mechanic called me about 6 weeks ago to tell me there is a knock in the lower end of the engine. She had just gone in for a routine oil change, but Big Red was terminally ill. The only solution, a new engine. With more than 368,000 miles, a roof rusted through on one side, and a street value of about $1,800, putting $8,000 to $10,000 worth of new engine in just wasn't logical. I thought about it for a minute anyway. I mean, I just put new tires on her in January. I have 30,000-mile tires on it with like 4,000 miles on them. So as you can tell, I have a serious emotional attachment to a car, an unfeeling mass of metal and machinery, but I use a gendered pronoun when I talk about her, and she has a name. I really cried a lot those first few days. My husband thought I was seriously overreacting, and even I couldn't explain my own reaction. It's a car. I thought maybe I had finally lost my mind, gone over the edge, but with some reflection, it became obvious to me that I'm grieving. So maybe you've experienced something similar, maybe less intense, like an inability to let go of your child's first blanket even though they're 40 years old. Perhaps you have a set of dishes belonging to your great-grandmother that you wouldn't dare use, but you also won't take them out of the box or out of the closet. You might have a wobbly bookcase that you bought secondhand when you were in college that your spouse just wishes you would take to Goodwill already. This phenomenon is not unusual, it turns out. Developing strong emotional attachments to inanimate objects is actually well documented in both psychology and consumer behavior research. And there are several reasons people become attached to things, but the interesting thing about this is the consumer behavior research figured this out 60 years before the psychologists did. First, objects like cars or houses or even clothing often serve as an extension of self. Rugged outdoors people drive four-wheel drive trucks. People deeply concerned about the environment drive electric cars. Minivans are so closely associated with suburban family life, they're called mommy pods. And I'm sure we've all made a snap judgment about someone based on what they drive, especially when they cut us off in traffic. And things that have been in your life during significant life events also become physical reminders of those events, whether the memories are good or bad. A friend of mine kept her mother's clothes for years after her mother passed. She couldn't wear them. Big Red and I have been through so many things together, happy, sad, fun, and scary. She is a literal representation of my life's journey. It's also a very human thing to anthropomorphize objects to give them human characteristics, especially ones we interact with regularly. I know my car doesn't hear me when I pat her on the dashboard and say, "Good job," when she gets me home through a torrential rain pour. But giving objects names and talking to them deepens our emotional connection, even if we're doing it unintentionally or as a light-hearted way to express gratitude. I've been known to speak kindly to my printer very recently, although I don't know if the subsequent frustration when it still won't print counts as emotional attachment, and I'm pretty sure that swearing at it doesn't count either. Or anything. Objects we own for a long time, like cars and houses especially, objects that play large roles in our day-to-day lives, can become dear to us as they frequently provide continuity during times of change. Familiarity often offers a sense of comfort and stability, especially when life becomes chaotic. And finally, a person's investment of time and money in caring for an object can cause that object to have an outsized value to that person. It's a cognitive bias that actually has a name. It's called the IKEA effect. And several studies have demonstrated that people will place a disproportionately high value on things that they help create or maintain. The IKEA effect was identified and named by Michael Norton of the Harvard Business School in conjunction with his colleagues Daniel Moken of Yale and Dan Ariely of Duke, who published the results of their 3 studies in 2011, although, like I said, the phenomenon was identified by market researchers as far back as 1959, which is kind of interesting that the people who specialize in selling you stuff figured this out before the scientists. But it all came about because Norton attended a Build-A-Bear workshop. Are you all familiar with those? You go to the mall, you build a teddy bear. They let you pick the fur and the clothes and the eyes, and you put it together. You do all of the work, but you pick all the components like in a Subway. And after he was done, he wondered why he was willing to pay so much more for a teddy bear that he built himself when he literally could have gone to the store and bought a finished one for less than half the price. And this experiment, because he's an academic, led him and his colleagues to design a series of experiments. One test gave a set of subjects a box. It was an unassembled IKEA piece of furniture. Some people built their items very carefully, and some just hurried through the exercise. And a subset of that group was told to build their item, then take it apart and put it back in the box. At the end, all of those subjects were allowed to bid on the object that they had built. The ones who finished the project, whether they built it carefully or quickly, consistently offered to pay top dollar for their own work. And as a control, another group was brought in, non-builders, were brought in to bid on the exact same items. Their prices were significantly lower because they saw nothing more than cheap furniture. Thus the name IKEA effect. Other experiments revealed that people who build things themselves will pay anywhere from 2 to 5 times more than people who are simply buying a finished object. You really do love the things you make yourself, and that's why Build-A-Bear and IKEA are so successful. My experiences with Big Red can be classified within all 5 of these reasons. She's a physical reminder of my triumph over being treated as less than and a celebration of completing a college journey. She's been a reliable constant in a life of new jobs, layoffs, divorces, marriages, and hurricanes. She's gained a name along the way, although for the life of me, I don't remember how the name Big Red. We never owned a smaller vehicle where she would be I have no idea. She's Big Red. And the IKEA effect is quite real. From simple oil changes to radiator repairs in the driveway and several hours of watching YouTube videos so I could change my own headlight relay switch when it failed on my way home from work on a January night, I put a lot of money and personal time and effort into her upkeep. But this experience has been a completely unexpected upheaval in my life. I literally spent 3 days crying about this car. I almost had to call off work because I was so concerned, I was so upset when I thought about her, I was going to break into tears in a Teams meeting. But it's also been more educational than I would have guessed. I learned that it can be hard for me to be kind to myself. I felt silly and out of control for crying so much over a car. But now I know there's lots of reasons for that. Any object can become an extension of yourself, and in that, be a valid and critical expression of your identity. Losing that object means coming face to face with terms of what your perception of your identity in the world is, of your own idea of your self-worth. And there's been a lot of introspection the last few weeks. I also realize I have lived out my personal value of not being wasteful by literally using up something that most people replace every 5 years or so. Maybe not so much you use, but lots of people. When people ask why I kept the Jeep for so long, my answer was until the cost of upkeep exceeded the cost of buying a new one, there wasn't any reason to replace it. Not being a conspicuous consumer is one of my identities, manifested in the real world by my vehicle. Because I formed such a strong emotional attachment to Big Red, I now recognize that something so deceptively simple, a common day-to-day part of my life as driving my car, can touch so many parts of my life, that's truly the holy in the mundane. I should pay better attention. My car is a nexus of experiences and relationships that until I didn't have her anymore, I previously never thought about. The security guards at work knew me by my Jeep, which I didn't know until I went to go get my new parking sticker. I won't be seeing my mechanic, Tony, as often, although we still have an older Mazda he maintains, but I'll get to meet and know the people who will service my next car, because I did go buy a new car. A GMC Terrain with a Denali package, all the bells and whistles. Other than my house, it's the most expensive thing I've ever purchased. And despite the cost, it's unlikely to last 26 years, but it's also highly unlikely that I'll be driving in another 26 years. It's an amorphous white blob that I keep losing in parking lots full of other amorphous white blobs. The number of times I have walked up to somebody else's car and can't figure out why the door won't open. But it's got the cargo space, and it's got a good safety rating, and so much more technology than anything we built in 1999. It has 360-degree cameras. I can see the top of my car when I'm in my car. You push the buttons to shift the gears, and the seats are air-conditioned. That's the best part so far. It feels like I went from a covered wagon to the space shuttle, and we're calling it Space Shuttle for now because it's white. And it will park itself, both parallel and perpendicular. I haven't figured out how to do that yet. So maybe I will be driving it when I'm in my 80s, and we'll have another 2.5 decades of stories to share. So thank you, Big Red, and thank y'all for listening to me.